thrilled you're all here. You all have, you have choices, like the airlines say. You have choices when you fly. You have choices with what you could be doing tonight, and I'm glad you're spending some time with me. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then why I'm running and what I think the issues are. As the mayor mentioned, I came to Tennessee in 1978. I grew up, I moved around some as a kid. I actually was born in South Dakota, which is kind of a good fun fact. And then both my parents grew up on farms in Illinois, and then my dad, after he got out of the service, worked for IBM, which kind of means I've been moved, and we were moved around the Midwest some. But we ended up in Gardner, Massachusetts, which is a mill town. It's a classic mill town of about 17,000 people, 60 miles west of Boston. When I was a kid, those 60 miles were a long, long way. And what was made there was furniture. They made chairs. And when I was in the 70s, when I was in junior high school and high school, those places were closing down. A lot of them were, and the city was getting smaller and smaller. But we had, our nickname was Chair Town, and the world's largest chair was outside of my high school. And so when after graduating from high school in '74, I went to college in New York City. And then when I was graduating from college, I thought the world needed another lawyer. And so I was encouraged strongly to look at Vanderbilt. So I applied to Vanderbilt, and I moved here in August of 1978. And as Madeline mentioned, sort of the big thing that happened to me in law school was not torts or property or constitutional law. The big thing that happened to me in law school was I met a woman. And so I met Ann Davis, who was a Nashville native, a whole lot smarter than me, and we fall in love, and it's the classic story. We go through 2 years of debating where we're going to live after we get married. I'm arguing for Chairtown, and she's arguing for a dynamic, growing Nashville. And I live in Nashville. So it turned out to be the best thing that could ever happen to us. It's been a wonderful state, wonderful city to raise a family. We have 3 kids. My oldest is a lawyer in Nashville. He and his wife had our first grandchild a little over a year ago. I have 2 daughters, one who just graduated from college, and I smile every time I say that. She just graduated from college, and then my youngest will graduate in May of this year. And so when I got out of law school, I joined the public defender's office. And that work was really important to me. I felt like every day I was helping people. It was important to protect people's rights, to make sure everybody got a fair representation in court, and that their voices were heard. You got exposed and learned a lot about poverty, obviously. You learned a lot about drug addiction and alcoholism and mental illness. And after doing that for a while as an assistant in 1990, I decided to run for public defender, and I was elected in 90 and re-elected in 94 and then re-elected in 98. In 1999, Bill Purcell was elected mayor of Nashville. And Bill and I had been assistant public defenders together. And so he likes to say we met in jail, but Bill asked me to leave being public defender to become the city's director of law, the city's lawyer. And so I ran a law department of 30, 35 lawyers and handled all the city's legal affairs. And you were kind of involved in everything. It was a fascinating job. And so by '99, when Bill had served his 2 terms and was not running for re-election, the campaign was underway, and I'm kind of watching it, and there were 5 well-known candidates, serious candidates in the race. And I started thinking, I have some ideas. There's some things I want to do for the city and some thoughts about how the city should move forward. And so I decided to run, and I got into the race last, and just to tell you how it was going, when I first got in, it was in January, then maybe around March, one of our local papers did an online poll. And this poll was totally unscientific. You just go online, vote as many times you want, and they tabulate the numbers. But the results come out, and they were devastating for me. I'm last, and I'm at like 5% of the poll. And so I remember coming down one morning for breakfast when I was about to go out and campaign again, And my wife was there with my middle child, Frances, and she was probably about 13 then. And she overhears Ann and I talking about this poll. And as we're talking about it, I'm looking at her face, and it's getting all dark, and she looks really worried and nervous. And finally, she gets up and she comes over to me and she says, Dad, you can still drop out. You can still get out. But luckily, I hung in there, and I was elected mayor in September of '07 and took office that month. And I had really two very different terms as mayor. You know, when I got elected, Nashville was doing well. I mean, it had a lot of things going for it. It was a good, steady growth. But about 8 months after I got elected, the whole country goes into the deepest recession since the Depression. And it changed everything. You know, instead of going off and putting more money in building projects and other things, we had to reevaluate the budgets entirely. And one fiscal year, we actually had less money than the year before in terms of revenue. And that had never happened before in the metropolitan government. And so we had to make tough decisions, and we cut most departments 15 to 20%, including my own. But we didn't cut education, we didn't cut public safety, and we didn't stop working on economic development, because those are the things that I thought we needed to do to move the city forward. And we weren't able to add money much. We did with public safety because of the federal grants that we had to later assume. But I felt we had to maintain those. We couldn't lose ground on those things. And then we were aggressive about economic development. It was during that time period we built the new convention center. I mean, people said, you know, Mayor, this isn't a good time to build a convention center in the middle of a recession. But it was the exact right time to do it. We needed the jobs, we needed the economic energy, we needed our tourism industry to live up to its potential. And so we built it. And then as it worked out, I mean, it would never be cheaper to build that building than when we built it. We probably saved $50 to $70 million versus building it today, just because everything was cheaper. And then on top of the recession, we had the flood. And the flood was you know, about $2 to $3 billion of private property losses, hundreds of millions of public property, and 11 citizens died. But the flood, to me, will always be the reaction of the people in Nashville who looked out for each other, looked out for their neighbors, looked out for total strangers, and we got the city back up on its feet through volunteerism, really, faster than anybody thought. And we continue to work hard on recruiting business to Nashville and creating a stronger economy. So the end of my first term, you know, we had the New York Times call us the It City. We got the TV show Nashville, which, you know, when you talk about making a deal for economic development, if ABC is going to have a show on and name it after your city, that's a good deal. And then businesses started relocating, and we were holding on to our businesses, and so the boom began. And so the second term, we weren't rolling in money, but because we were still kind of recovering from the recession, but we were able to do things that the reason I ran for office. You know, I really committed to public education. We put 37% increase over those years into public education. We moved starting teacher pay in Nashville from 30th in the state to 3rd. We put over $600 million in the capital programs for schools. We put a lot of money into parks and greenways and trying to encourage healthier lifestyles and making the city more attractive. We did a lot with libraries. And so I always tell people, if you have a 2-term limit like I had, you know, take the tough one first and have a little more fun the second one. So when I left office in September of 2015, I've been teaching at Belmont, and then I decided to run for governor. And the reason I'm running is this. I'm convinced the people of Tennessee want a pragmatic, common sense, get it done governor who is not going to be an ideologue, who's not going to be somebody who's totally worried about party lines. They want somebody who's going to concentrate on the issues that matter to voters and who's going to make decisions on what's best for the people of Tennessee and what's going to move our state forward. You know, I think, as Madeline mentioned, I think the training you get as a mayor is different. Because, you know, when I ran for mayor of Nashville, I ran in a nonpartisan race, and you had to get Democrats, Republicans, and independents to support you. And then when you're running a city, you don't do it. You're not thinking, what's the ideological position here, or what's the party's position here. It's about what's going to make Knoxville's future better, what's going to make the lives better for the citizens of Knoxville. And that's the approach I want to take to the job of being governor. There's a great quote from Fiorello LaGuardia, more famous now for the airport than his career, but he had a great career. He was mayor of New York in the 30s and during World War II. And he started out as a Republican, and he kind of morphed into maybe a Democrat by the end, I don't know. But he once said, there's no Democrat or Republican way of filling a pothole. People just want the pothole filled. People just want to see the government get things done. And so what I think the issues are that facing the state that are really vital right now, number one in my book is public education. I mean, that's the issue that can transform the state. That's the issue that's going to move us forward. And we have had two very good governors in a row, Bill Haslam and Phil Bredesen, who in their own different ways made education a priority and made progress. And I think we have got to keep education as a top priority. And to me, that means producing more college graduates, but it also means recognizing that not everyone's going to go to college. That people are going to not go to college, and we need to have the vocational, technical certification programs so that people can be ready to take a job that will pay them well, and they can raise a family. And I think that's absolutely essential. We need to pay our teachers more. We need to, that is the key. I mean, teachers are the whole deal, really, when it comes to education. And in my mind, we got to pay more to attract and retain the best. And if you look at the state right now, I can tell you I've been in Memphis where I met with the STEM leaders in education there, and every one of them said the biggest challenge they face in math and science and computer education is keeping the teachers they've got versus losing them constantly to the private sector. If you talk to rural communities around the state, you'll talk to superintendents, and almost every one of them will tell you that our biggest problem is once we get an advanced math teacher, once we get an advanced science teacher, once we get a foreign language teacher, neighboring districts, urban areas, will get them and pay them $10,000 more. Or because of the nature of our state, they'll go over the state line, or they'll go into the private sector. And so I think that's just key. The second issue I want to mention is this. I'm a big believer that you got to have a strong private sector that is growing, that's producing jobs, that's letting people get ahead, advance in their lives, sort of giving people the opportunity to live the American dream. And I think you do that because, number one, you want to have a strong economy that is giving people the ability to live their dreams and to find opportunity. But when you're doing that, you are expanding your tax base. You are expanding revenue that's available to you. And so that's how you pay for education. That's how you pay for health. Tennessee is got lots of parts of the state that are doing great. Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga, lots of places are doing great. But there are lots of areas, particularly rural areas, that are not. And I think we need to concentrate and make sure that we're doing all that we can to help those areas that are struggling. And so that would be my efforts. I think you can be pro-business. I think you can be pro strong private sector at the same time being a strong environmentalist. The way I see it is one of the things we have to value as Tennesseans, and I believe this more strongly now than I did a year ago when I started this campaign, is this is a beautiful state. And a lot of people want to be here because it's a beautiful state. They value clean air, they value clean water, they value parks, they value the ability to ski, to hike, to hunt, to do whatever in the outdoors. And you don't want to lose it. And that's part of what makes Tennessee such an attractive place to live. So I think you can do both, and you need to do both. And then the third thing I want to mention is healthcare. All right? Now, healthcare, there are three sort of issues here. One is sort of the crisis we're facing in the opioid area, which is a real crisis, and more needs to be done. I applaud Governor Haslam for his proposals. I think they're good. I think it's a good start. We need to put more money in the treatment that he's allocated. I'll talk about Medicaid expansion in a minute, but we put ourselves in a position where treatment has not been available as it needs to be. And we need to make sure there's also outpatient treatment, particularly for people who can't afford to go inpatient. We need to have a public education campaign like against anti-smoking or drunk driving. where everybody begins to get it that opioids can be dangerous. And we haven't done that yet, and that needs to happen not only in Tennessee but on a national level. We need to get a handle on the overprescription of drugs and opioids. I mean, we're 50th per capita in the number of prescriptions written in the country. And then I think we need to empower law enforcement to protect citizens, because they're, now you're getting fentanyl mixed with heroin, and people are making money out of the suffering and deaths of people by selling these narcotics, and law enforcement needs to have the tools it needs to answer that problem. The second issue I want to discuss is sort of the big health issue. And this is something I worked on when I was mayor. If you look at Tennessee and you look at maybe 10 or 12 health indicators, whether it's obesity, low birth rates, weights, heart disease, there's a whole series of them, women's health. We rank in the bottom 10 in all of them. I mean, and that's the wrong side. We're the 10 worst states for that. And so one of the things we have to do as a state is get beyond thinking that the only time you offer medical assistance is when somebody's already sick, already developed a chronic disease. We have to do more preventative work. We have to encourage people to live healthier lifestyles. That could happen in schools. It should happen in schools. I can tell you, I wish I had taken nutrition, or I wish I had taken the class when I was in high school about what you should eat. I mean, a lot of this is personal responsibility. I love to exercise, but I like to eat. I'm one of those guys who, when our family gets a pizza, when we get down to the last piece, I'm like sweating. I'm so nervous I was going to get her. But you should learn about how to take care of yourself. And we need to make the healthy choice the easy choice in terms of greenways and parks, and we need to have the best state parks in the country like we used to have. That's important. Now, the third thing I want to mention is probably the most discussed thing in this campaign right now, is access to health care. I believe it was probably the worst mistake our legislature's made in 30 to 40 years was not doing the Medicaid expansion. When you think about that, essentially what that did is we said no to $3.5 to $4 billion with a B, money that could have been used to give access to health care to people with low incomes, people with disabilities, people with pre-existing conditions, people who are aging. And we said no. And that money now is not being saved in a lockbox over here in the corner. It's being spent in the states, the 32 states that said yes, including our friends to the north in Kentucky, and including Governor Pence's, Vice President Pence's state in Indiana. And by saying no, what's happened is this. We have citizens who don't go to seek medical treatment because they're afraid to, because they can't pay for it, and they think, I can't go get something I can't pay for. Or you have people who go and get it and they try to pay, and their bills are so big they're facing financial ruin. Or, more commonly, you have people go and have medical treatment and there's no reimbursement for the hospital. And so what happens then? Well, now Tennessee is only behind Texas in terms of the number of hospitals that have closed. We have 10 hospitals that have closed. Decatur County closed 2 months ago. And so what does that do? Well, I've talked about economic development and helping areas that need help. So if you're a small town, your hospital closes, it's hard to keep people. It's certainly hard to attract people, and it's hard to attract business. And then usually the hospital is the third or fourth highest employer in the county, and that's another hit. So it really has a damaging impact on a community. When you look at this issue, whether it's government hospitals, whether it's nonprofit hospitals, or whether it's for-profit hospitals, we have put ourselves in a position where we are not competitive. If you're a for-profit hospital, which I think about 37% of our hospitals are, why would you make a $500 million investment to build a hospital in Tennessee when you're not going to get reimbursement? We've hurt ourselves. And I'll go back to what I began with. This is the sort of decision where you say, look, you don't make this decision on ideology. You don't make it because you don't like the president. You don't make it because of politics. You make this decision because what's right for the people of Tennessee. And they made the wrong decision because they didn't do it that way. So the next governor is going to have to be a strong advocate for us getting our fair share of Medicaid dollars. It's going to be challenging. The president's current budget actually cuts Medicaid. So it's going to be a real challenge in the next years. Look, this is a great state. It really is. I mean, I firmly believe that Tennessee's best days are still to come. Whether you look at our central location, our generally temperate weather, sometimes we get it wrong. Our ability to be a distribution center, the tradition here of being fiscally responsible, our low taxes, a place where people want to do business, we got a great future. But to get there, we got to take care of the basics. And the basics are get education right, have a strong economy, and make sure we're doing right by healthcare. And if we do that, then we'll be in good shape. I need your votes, I need your help in all sorts of ways. We have been to 87 counties? 86, I was hoping 87. So since the campaign began, we're going to go to all of them. I've been to many of them multiple times. And it's been a great reception. I can say I've been to Mountain City, to Memphis, and it's a wonderful state. And I'd be happy to answer any easy questions. Anybody's got any? Yes?
It may not be an easy question, but it's one that may be able to fix some problems. I know it's not popular, but we border 8 states, and every state that we border has an income tax. Our legislator put it in the state constitution that we don't have one, but we see that every state that we border, they don't have the problems that we do in terms of paying teachers what they're worth, giving infrastructure, taking care of healthcare. Would that be something that should have come down the line, hopefully, in the next, I don't know how many years, that we review the fact that we're missing an income tax in the state, and that's hurting us?
No, I think the voters have spoken on this, because that's how the Constitution got amended. And it sort of reminds me of a very brief quote from a former mayor and former governor, Phil Bredesen, who said, income tax is off the table. And I think that's where we are in Tennessee. Mm. Any other questions? Yes.
I know you said, like, if you're elected governor, your plan is to not raise taxes, but why was that something that you did, like when you were the mayor of Nashville?
Well, I don't recall saying anything about taxes today, but well, I think they're just different entities. I mean, one of the things you realize when you're in local government is, our main source of revenue is property tax. And under the Tennessee Constitution, you have a reappraisal of property values every 4 or 5 years, and that number either goes up or down. And so, generally, I think for Knoxville and for Nashville, it tends to go up. And then taxes actually get reduced. The tax number, the actual dollar number you're paying, gets reduced. And then if you have growth in your city, which we certainly had that during my time as mayor, there were about 80 people a day moving to Nashville. And you have to build new schools, new parks, new libraries, then you need to spend some of that revenue on maintaining what you have. The state doesn't face those challenges nearly as directly as the local government does. Local governments are just different than the state. But I mean, I can say, it's, because of reappraisals, the tax rate in terms of the dollar amount went down when I was mayor. And I think I was the first mayor, you have to check the facts on this, but I think I was, what's to say, in my first term, I went through a term without having to raise taxes at all, changing the tax rate, which I'm not sure that has happened much before. Part of that was I made the decision during the recession that I wasn't going to raise taxes to balance our books when the books of businesses and families were unbalanced, and we had to make our decisions about cuts too. But I think that comparing the state and local government is not really apples to oranges. Yep.
What is your feeling on outsourcing jobs for universities and public works?
Well, I think I was opposed to what was proposed at UT. And I am not in favor of the privatization that was proposed for state parks. I would say that I would look at every circumstance where something is proposed. You know, the state park situation to me is state parks are passed along as legacies to our children, our grandchildren, and their children. And they are there for the public always to have access to the outdoors. They need to be free, they need to be really good. And I think that's something that belongs as part of the public responsibility. So I look at every case. But in general, I'm not going to be privatizing a whole lot of things.
We got time for maybe one more.
Yeah.
So, as you probably know, poverty is a big issue in the state. Specifically in Knoxville, I think our poverty rate is above 25%. So, other than expanding Medicaid, are there any specific policies we pursue that would be kind of anti-poverty?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at everything we can do. I mean, clearly, I think the biggest concern to me with poverty would come in the two areas that I'm saying are priorities, which is health. I mean, fundamentally, if you look at poverty, you don't want people to suffer or to not get treatment or help when they're ill because of their lack of means. And so I think that is absolutely critical. And then I think my belief in education is that I think education is a great equalizer. When you are investing in education, you're giving people the opportunity to get ahead, to advance themselves, get better jobs. You're also able, in terms of education, to hopefully make sure kids are getting enough to eat, and hopefully getting some access to health care there too. But those are the two big areas. And then I would add on to that the third priority, which is having a strong economy. I mean, one of the best ways to deal with poverty is to have a robust economy that's creating jobs and opportunities. And I think that's important. Go ahead.
You say one of your focus for your campaign is healthcare. How does women's healthcare play into your plan? I know over the past few years, the legislative has always tried to present new bills, kind of workarounds for women's health, whether it be limiting doctors' access to hospitals or incorporating the waiting period. So in addition to expanding Medicaid for affordable care, how do you kind of stand to protect women in today's current climate on these issues?
That's a good question. I mean, number one, I think we have to realize as a state where we stand on women's health, which is 45th in the country, which is not where you want to be. I think we also need to understand that you know, the issues around a woman's ability to consult a doctor and make her own decisions as to her life, the state's interference in that, it's not the role for the state. And so, you know, I'm one who believes that the government should stay out of that as much as possible. It should not be throwing up barriers where women don't have access to doctors.
So in a state where the Second Amendment is really held near and dear to a lot of people's heart, but also in the aftermath of so many shootings across America, where do you stand on gun control legislation?
Well, I mean, I think this is an opportunity where, because of what happened in Florida and because of all the other things that have happened before, that there needs to be a meaningful conversation around ways we can find to make sure that we are protecting ourselves and that we find ways to keep weapons from falling into the hands of dangerous people. I think most people can agree on that. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe, you know, that people have a right to firearms, but there's obviously a limit to that. And I don't think we want people who we know are going to go out and do some antisocial behavior that results in the deaths of 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, for that to happen. And so I think there's got to be some meaningful discussions around background checks that need to take place. You know, I don't think, you know, it's not going to be easy, because because I think that, you know, you have to get something that both sides will agree on, and there'll have to be compromises. But given the events of the last couple of years, and I think back when I was mayor, when Sandy Hook happened, you know, we immediately got with the school board and put together, I don't know how much, a few $1 million to immediately begin trying to make schools safer. But this discussion needs to take place, and it should take place now. Yes.
Tennessee ranks 50th in the state for voter turnout.
Yeah.
What are some of your plans to help us move ahead?
Well, I mean, I think there's the obvious things, and I think there's work being done on this in terms of voter registration and making it easier for people to vote. I mean, that we should look at almost any way we can to make it easy to vote. But then I think the big thing is for all of us, is to get people to vote. I mean, you know, we can make it easy, and it's gotten easier in the course of my lifetime, I would say, to vote. And there's been some efforts to not let that happen. But people got to vote. And that's the bottom line. And so I think what really needs to happen between now and the next election, whether it's the one in May, August, or November, is that people are encouraged to vote, that people are encouraged to register, and that people are given information about the election so that they'll get out and vote. You know, we finished last in 2016, and I don't think we will again, but the only way it's going to change is if people are mobilized and vote. And that's got to happen. Yes, sir.
You've got a great record on greenways and parks, and I wonder if you're familiar with the Land and Water Conservation Fund at the federal level, which is a permanent fund that goes to the national federal lands. And many years ago, I worked on a fund like that for Tennessee, which got Republican and Democratic support. Didn't pass in the legislature. Can you foresee an opportunity to direct permanent funds, not a lot, but a permanent stream of funds to the state parks and public lands?
Yeah, I don't want to make a commitment, right, because I need to look at it. But I can tell you what I did as mayor. You know, we did a public-private partnership with the foundation and with the Martin Foundation and the Land Trust for Tennessee to do an open space study of Davidson County. And then we set very ambitious goals to get that open space, which would require us purchasing land or hopefully people donating. And so we blew through those goals during my last couple of years as mayor. I mean, that was the only advantage of the recession, was you could really get some good real estate deals. But I believe in that. I think that's important, and I think that is something that would only enhance Tennessee's beauty and enhance its appeal. And I don't see that as a partisan issue. I think people agree on that. That's
We have plenty of public.
so I would be interested in hearing more about that, and I certainly would. I'm very supportive of open space. Yes.
Karl, a little bit related to that, could you talk a little bit about mass transportation or alternative transportation? You know, the culture is so car-centered. We'll never be able to build enough roads to accommodate going traffic. So obviously, I think we need to start moving toward mass transit and things of that nature. And right now, the way everything is funded by the state, you know, we've got the gas tax, but it's all almost going toward car-oriented infrastructure. And can you talk a little bit about how we would fund?
Yeah, so I obviously worked on mass transit as mayor, and I have tracks on my back to prove it that it's a difficult issue. And so what we did, I mean, we increased dramatically the support for our bus system. I actually tried to take the bus as much as possible, sort of to encourage folks to do that. And then we had a mass transit proposal to do bus rapid transit that got way late in the legislature, to be kind. And now we have another proposal that is going forward to a referendum in May. One of the things that I learned as mayor is this. When I went to Denver early on my first term, and I met with then Mayor Hickenlooper in Denver, he told me about this mayor's caucus he had formed there, where he invited all the mayors from surrounding counties and cities to meet to discuss issues they have in common. And so I did what any self-respecting person would do. I stole the idea, came back, and formed a mayor's caucus in Middle Tennessee. And the issue that we worked on mainly was transit. And, you know, but, and mayors of different political parties, there's pretty much widespread agreement this is the issue. And these are, you know, mayors are different because they're down in the, you know, they're in the weeds working on it. It's not, you know, a legislature somewhere looking above, and they're in the weeds and they get it. Now, it's hard. You can get regional cooperation. I think we got it. I think you can do it in all different parts of the state. But ultimately, you're going to need state leadership and state help to get it over the line. I mean, you know, Nashville can build a great system of transit, but unless we connect it to Wilson County, you know, Rutherford County, Williamson County, Sumner County, it's not going to solve the gridlock that's occurring in Middle Tennessee. And so you're going to need to make need to have counties working together, and the state has a role there. I think the governor has a role, and I would be very interested in being involved in that. All right, well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.